Thank you, RC. Uh, well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you folks tonight on a subject that's I've been involved in and been engrossed in for longer than most of you's been on this earth. Uh, if longevity is an attribute, I have one regarding solar. I started working solar in 1974 when I worked at NASA in Huntsville, Alabama. And most of you certainly don't remember it. You weren't here, but might not realize our first energy crisis was in 1973 when we had an oil embargo imposed on us by some of the Mideastern countries that supplied most of our oil. That was not a genuine shortage, it was a political ploy that actually helped get the OPEC organization started where they could control the pricing. But we had ran out of gasoline, had gas lines, had gas stations shutting down, and that woke everybody up in our government to that something needed to be done, an alternate source of energy. So there was a huge program that was passed by Congress and had almost unlimited funding to conduct research and development for alternate energy, with solar being the primary subject. And so NASA in Huntsville was fortunate, in my opinion, to get assigned to provide all the technical support for that program. So I transferred in 1974 to the group at NASA that was working the solar programs. And I got bitten by the solar bug then, and it's never turned me loose. But that energy crisis, as I said, was not real. In the early 80s, 81, 82, energy prices went back down and stayed down very low for the next 30 years. So once it went back down, most people, including the government, didn't care that much about alternate energy anymore. But I stayed involved by working primarily for the next 30 years on the space program regarding, in one way or another, solar energy. And so that allowed me to stay on top of the technology development. Also enjoyed the whole 30 years primarily with the idea that I always said that gasoline needed to be about $3 a gallon, and I'd get back in the earth-based solar business. And so in the early 2000s, it did, and I did. So I formed Southern Solar Systems in 2007 to pursue this. But let me proceed on to, I'm already covering the first chart, who I am and who Southern Solar is. But I have a BS degree from Auburn in aerospace engineering, and that's how come I ended up at NASA. But I worked for NASA and Department of Energy and Department of Defense, all for the space-based solar programs, until we started Southern Solar in 2007 to address both solar and a variation of solar, which is geothermal heat pumps, which uses the stored energy in the earth to assist with providing constant temperature and heat sinks for geothermal heat pumps. But during that time we've expanded. We're licensed in Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana, Missouri, Texas, and North Carolina. But we recently partnered with Greenversity here, even though I've been had a presence in the southeast Missouri since 2013, and we've installed several solar systems further down in the Boot Hill at Portageville and Gideon and Holcomb in that area. But we didn't have much of a presence here from a business standpoint. And it was a natural partnership for me to join Greenversity with Janet and Reese, who are, of course, local, well-known, well-respected, and had this wonderful facility. And I brought to them some experience and I like to say some capability in the design and installation side of the house. So that's my primary function is solar system design and installation. Let's talk about solar photovoltaics, or PV as it's usually called, but I just call it solar. But the grid-tied systems, or utility grid-tied systems, are the most common, and it's a relatively simple system. As this chart indicates, you have solar panels that feed direct current DC power to an inverter that takes that DC power and converts it to AC, alternating current, and that inverter synchronizes with the utility lines so that the power coming out of that inverter is the same voltage, frequency, and phase as the utility grid. And it's usually fed to the utility through a meter, if there are directly at the point of use or the facility, the home or commercial business where the solar system is installed. But the way it synchronizes, the electricity can freely flow in both directions. If you're generating more than you're using at the facility, the excess flows out the wires through the meter into the utility grid, and the local neighbors absorb it till it's gone. If you need more than you're generating, the reverse happens. It automatically use what you got. Any extra you need automatically comes through the wires. All this happens seamlessly, and you don't know the difference in using the power. It runs all your appliances exactly like the grid because the power is exactly like grid power. Another type of system that is becoming more popular is off-grid systems, and that's primarily because of the recent advances in batteries that the automobile companies are primarily responsible for. There's a lot of competition worldwide within all the automobile manufacturers to come up with the best electric vehicles, the most efficient, and the big requirement for that and the most difficult is batteries. So in the last just short number of years, there's been great advances made in increasing the efficiency of batteries, reducing their weight, and reducing their cost. So batteries, off-grid systems are going to become, in my opinion, in the next 3 to 5 years, very, very popular for a number of reasons, one of which is people generally hate to pay a utility bill and hate being a slave to the utility company. And so there's a lot of desire to go off-grid. There's other systems that are available. The technology has advanced greatly in the last few years in that when I first started looking at grid tying, we grid tied a small hydroelectric system in 1982 to our local utility company, and inverters were not available. My electrical engineer partner had to design it from scratch and build it to interface with the utility. Now we have inverters that are available worldwide to sync with any utility. There's lots of competition. The cost has come way down on the inverters too. And there's inverters that have multiple functions, as in a grid tied with battery backup system. You can feed a charge controller to charge batteries. The batteries will feed the inverter, and the inverter can run your home and feed the excess back to the utility company. Or it can receive power from the utility company and charge the batteries and power the home at night. seamlessly again. And what's not shown in this chart, that same inverter can take power from a standby generator and do the same thing. It can feed the house and charge the batteries from a standby generator if the power is unavailable, the utility is unavailable, like during an ice storm or due to wind damage or whatever to the utility company. So those systems, all the hardware in that plus more is readily available today off the shelf from numerous sources. Now, we hear a lot of people say, well, we don't have the sun in this part of the country that they do out west in the desert, so solar's not as good. Well, that's true, it's not as good, but this chart breaks the available solar energy down into 4 categories, and you can see we're in next to the best in almost the entire state of Missouri. So we're, if you look out west, we're as good as about 3/4 of California here in Missouri. And this is the type of power that we call one sun, which is solar PV. Just takes whatever sun hits it, whether it's a direct beam or whether it's cloudy and overcast. It'll take whatever daylight hits it and convert it to electricity directly. So that's why we're in such good shape here for standard solar PV. Here's the next couple of charts shows several pictures showing various installations that we've designed and installed. The one in the left is just a shed with the roof covered with solar panels. One on the right is a science building at Austin Peay University in Clarksville, Tennessee, that was designed identically to the building adjacent to it, and they wanted to keep the same architecture on campus throughout campus. The only difference, they had shingles on the roof with one next to it instead of solar panels, but we covered the entire building with solar panels. The lower left is a small factory in Tennessee, and we covered all the parking spaces. They had 54 employees at this little factory, and we covered all the parking spaces and gave them shaded parking, and that provided a place to install the solar systems without utilizing limited land space that was around the factory. The lower right is another example of a small parking shade structure. The upper left is a commercial membrane roof flat roof building with solar panels installed on it. Lower left is a poultry house, and that's one of the things that we've specialized in. Is we've done a lot of poultry farms. That's an ideal application for solar. There's lots of roof space available, and they use a lot of electricity, especially in the summertime, for ventilation. And that just happens to coincide with when we generate the most solar energy. So it's an ideal fit. The lower right, the upper right is a standard residential system. That's a 10 kilowatt system on a small frame house in the country. The lower right is a small system that tracks the sun from sun up to sundown, and it's a passive tracker that actually operates with no motors or drives, with fluid that transfers and shifts the weight based on where the sun is.
So it follows the sun.
From sun up to sundown. And by the way, please ask questions as we go if you have any. Don't worry about it. I'd rather you interrupt and ask any questions along the way. But the lower one is it's not one that's the only one we've ever sold and installed, because from an economic standpoint, it's not as cost effective. That one just happened to be at a dentist lake house, and we offered to install him twice as much solar for the same amount of money, and he said, no, I just want to see it move. So we said, fine, we'll put it in.
Do you get that much more benefit out of
That one, yeah, it will, but it doesn't make, that type doesn't make up for the extra cost. That'll pick up about 12 to 15% more energy during the day. But at the time we install that, it costs twice as much. Now there are tracking systems available now that are a lot less expensive or beginning to be marginally cost effective, especially on the large commercial ones or rural agricultural applications. But here's some examples of some different types of solar PV. Of course, the one on the right is a standard crystalline panel. One on the left is a type of laminate material, but that's just a standard steel standing seam metal roof, and it has a laminate glued to the flat portions. And that laminate is actually some of this material. This is an actual solar collector. You can pass that around. That's similar to that. That is, it's got some real practical applications, but at this time it's not manufactured in the quantities to make it nearly as inexpensive as standard panels. So it's more expensive per kilowatt hour produced than standard panels, but under certain conditions that's really a neat type of solar collector. Well, this just shows them installing. Those can be installed on the metal before it's installed, or actually installed on the roof after on an existing roof, or as it's being installed. This is another solar shingle, but there's quite a bit of work going on in the roofing manufacturing industry to develop an aesthetically pleasing and practical solar shingle that would blend in. And I don't have a good photograph of one, but if you look at the way this blends in over on the right, you can, they are making some that you cover the entire roof. And even if you have roof areas that are shaded and not going to be utilized generating electricity, they have some fake shingles that look just like them, so you can cover the whole roof. But unfortunately, those are still so expensive that they're only used in limited quantities because it's not cost effective.
How much energy does a shingle produce?
Well, actually, it's about like those there. They'll produce, per square foot, they produce about 2/3 as much as a standard silicon panel. Yeah. And they're getting better all the time, too, as far as the efficiency per square foot. Now, some of the benefits of solar systems are there are some federal tax credits and other incentives in some locations that make the systems cost effective today. Another thing is with the solar system, it provides you some independence from the increasing utility rates. I don't think anybody thinks utility rates aren't going to just continue going up. And solar is about to cross over where it's as cost effective as utility power, and so it's really on the verge of a genuine boom because of that. And also, solar can provide power in remote, hard-to-reach areas where there's no power. A lot of people now are building homes, and not just little crude cabins, but homes in the mountains far away from the utility grid. And in some cases, the cost of running utility power to those locations is as much as it costs to put an entire off-grid system and run off-grid and never worry about the utility. And there's very low maintenance to a solar system. A standard silicon panel is pretty fascinating even after all these years to me. You put them out, you install them, hook them up, and there's no moving parts. sun shines and electricity flows out the wires. We have some systems on some poultry farms that's been installed on the roof in the middle of one in particular 8-house poultry farm with all the dusty environment around. And they've been in over 5 years, and we purposely haven't even cleaned them. And they're still producing with little or no noticeable reduction in performance. In this part of the country, we get enough rain to normally wash them off. We always install them at least a 15-degree angle for that purpose, so that the rain will wash any dirt and debris off of it. And their long lifespan. You can expect a solar panel to last 30 plus years. They are actually, most all the manufacturers guarantee panels to produce a minimum of 80% as good as new for 25 years. That's a worldwide standard warranty. And some of the manufacturers are beginning to promise 30 years at least 80%. And that's proven out in the field, in that there are some solar panels that are basic crystalline panels made very similar, but with not as good of materials as today as modern panels, that's been in operation and been monitored by the government for 47 years now, I believe. And they're still operating, and they're operating at a degradation rate of a little bit less than 0.5% per year. So all that sounds great, so how much does it cost? Well, here's a little bit of history of the solar pricing. We started our company in '07, so I know these numbers from experience, not just pulled off the internet. When we first started in '07, we paid $4.32 per watt for wholesale for the solar panels. We were having to charge for a small residential system $8 plus per watt, and even for a commercial system $7.50 a watt. By 2012, we were installing for $5 and about $4.50 for the larger, not larger, but what we call small commercial systems in the 25 to 100 kilowatt range. Residential systems are usually in the average about 10 kilowatts, 10 to 15. By 2015, that was down to $3 and $2.75, and now this year we're selling residential systems installed turnkey, operating for about $2.50 a watt, and it'll vary off of that if there's special circumstances, but the average is about $2.50 a watt. And in this industry, we talk watt per watt. Everything's per watt. 1,000 watts is 1 kilowatt. So and a kilowatt of solar, a kilowatt running continuously for an hour is a kilowatt hour. So and a 10 kilowatt system on a residence in this part of the country on average will generate about 1,200 kilowatts hours per month. So, but you can see we're down to, we're paying well less than $1 a watt for solar panels now versus $4.32 in 2007. And that's all due to improvement in the efficiency per square foot, because the factories can build the same size panel for it costs them no more to build that panel that's in the same frame than it did when it was actually producing, only a little over half as much. The same size panel in '07 that we bought had 175 watts in a standard frame. Well, you can get up to about 280 watts in that same frame now. And just sheer volume. Because solar has grown so rapidly worldwide, there's been a lot of new factories built and it's automated so much that that there's very little labor. Less than 10% of the cost of a solar panel is labor. It's very automated. So the cost doesn't vary much worldwide. You hear a lot about Chinese panels being cheaper and maybe being dumped in the U.S. at discounts. But in reality, what I've seen happen, and I've been involved since the early 2000s watching the worldwide market, the U.S. manufacturers were just, in my opinion, spoiled to higher margins and more levels of management and overhead than some of the leaner operating countries. But that's changing. There are new factories going up in the U.S. today with all the same automation, and they've seen from experience that you don't need many layers of management to run a solar factory. I've seen it happen. All it takes to get in the solar manufacturing business is a small piece of property, a metal building, and be able to write a check for about $150 million, and in 6 months you can be spitting out solar panels. And there are actually a lot of people that can write that check, and that's what has happened over the last several years. And so the margins have gotten pretty thin, but they're still sustainable, and it appears that the prices are going to go down even more to the point where those bottom numbers of $2.50 and $2 are going to hit $1 and $1.50 where they level out. That's going to be another 3 to 5 years because it's flattening out now. But when it does get to that level, then it's going to be sustainable without any kind of incentive at all, tax-wise or any other kind. We'll talk about the financial incentives a little bit. One of the things that has really helped create this market is the tax credits that was put in place here in the U.S. back in 2005 of 30% of credit off your income tax, 30% of the total cost of a solar system. And a tax credit is cash money straight off your taxes, not a deduction from taxable income. So if you put in spend $20,000 on a solar system, 30% of that's $6,000, and you had $6,000 withheld from your paycheck during the year, you can get all that back, the whole $6,000, to help pay for your solar system. Well, that created a tremendous market, and there were some innovative people came up with ways to finance solar systems with third parties that can use large tax credits, so that they would, investment groups that are paying a lot of taxes would buy systems and lease them. You've probably heard of Solar City. They're the biggest leasing company in the world, leased to residential systems in several of the states that have laws that allow them to operate with third-party leases. Missouri is not one of them yet. But they have the investors that use the tax credits, then they discount the lease by giving the ultimate customer part of that tax credit. They get a good return, and what it amounts to is a tax equity lease, as it's called, can actually cost the customer less cash than paying cash for the system. Because of the 30% tax credit, as well as a depreciation that those investors can get, in some cases amounts to 60% of the total cost, and they will give sometimes up to 20 or 25% of that back as a discount off of the lease rate. But there's no upper limit on the amount of credit. It's 30% of the cost of the system. Now, it has to be the legitimate cost of the system, of course. There have been some companies that have worked schemes to inflate the price, and the Treasury Department caught on to that, and they got in a lot of trouble, and they're not around anymore. But it doesn't matter how much it is. If it's legitimate, you can still get 30% of the total cost straight off your taxes. That was, and that's got extended. It runs all the way through 2019 and then steps down to 26%, 22%, and then goes permanently to 10%. And if you saw those costs I was talking about, I think we're going to easily be able to put solar in at the same effective cost when we get down to 10% or even zero tax credit as we are now. Just like when we were charging $8 a watt, there was other incentives around the country that were on top of the tax credits that made the payback about the same when it was $8 as it is now when it's $2 and $2.50. And that was the whole intent of these overall incentives, was to kickstart this industry and give it the financial boost to help it till it could stand on its own feet. And this is one of the cases where those incentives have accomplished exactly what they were intended to do. This is for commercial systems only, and I know we're talking primarily just residential here, but in case you have or know someone that's in a commercial business, or including farming, agriculture of course is commercial, on top of the 30% tax credit, you can get accelerated 5-year depreciation, and you're allowed to depreciate 85% of the total cost, even though you just received a 30% credit. That's a little 15% bonus in the cost basis, and that's where, if you're in a 35% tax bracket, that has a cash value of another 30% of the total cost. So you can actually get 60% of the total cost paid for by the taxes you were already paying. So what does all this mean to you as a residential residence owner that would like to explore solar? Well, a residential installation currently will take 10 to 11 years to recover the investment. Now remember, this is a 30-plus year system, so even though that seems like a long time from an investment standpoint, it's still a good investment, since it will last 30-plus years. And what that does is, if you borrow the money or you have the money and invest it, you still have cost of money, because what you could make in some other investment is cost of that money, even if you have the cash. If you invest that in a solar system and amortize it over the 10 or 11 years or more, you will, and base it on today's electricity rates, and amortize it every how long it takes to pay for it, including that cost of money. That means that you're hedging any increase in electricity costs at today's rate, because you're not going to pay any more for your electricity. You're making it with your solar panels that are being paid for at a rate based on today's kilowatt hour rate. So you're hedging against any increase in the electricity costs. And you can, in Missouri, you're allowed by the net metering law to install a solar system anywhere on any utility up to the size that it takes to generate the kilowatt hours that you use on an annual basis total. So you can eliminate your entire utility bill with solar if you have the capability, or have the funds to install that larger system.
How do they do that on their construction? Because there's no history of
The utility companies can take the size of your home and the type of heating and cooling system, and they've got some charts and rules of thumbs that they can tell and estimate the kilowatt hours that you're going to use in that new home, and they'll base it on that. Then after you have some history, if it turns out if you add on or you use more than that, then you can add more if you so desire. If the reverse, if they overestimate and you got more than you need, then if you generate more than you need at the end of a 12-month period, keeping whatever's left over free. So you're incentivized not to overbuild the solar, because the intent of that law was to help you or allow you to offset your utility bill, but not put you in the solar utility business. Now, financing for solar systems in the past has been a real problem. It's for years it was almost impossible to get. You could borrow money on equity in your home or whatever, and then buy a solar system, but the solar system itself wouldn't stand as collateral, because it was just not. Banks and lenders weren't familiar enough with solar, hadn't been out long enough, hadn't been out in the volume for there to be a history that would show the risk as low as it really is, and now it's turned out to be proven. But when we first started in '07, there was I couldn't identify a single lender that would loan using solar as collateral. But that's really changed since 2007. In 10 years, it's proven itself as a viable industry, and we've got systems now, many and more every year, that's been sitting out there producing with no problems, and investors now are actually seeking solar investments because it's a excellent, dependable, long-term, relatively high yield investment for investors. And even banks and leasing companies they're becoming more comfortable with solar. And so there's companies now that will actually loan for a residential solar system using just the solar system as collateral, without having to go in and modify your mortgage or take a second mortgage or anything. And there's some of the mortgage lenders, and this is I think something I've been predicting and looking forward to and hoping would happen since I started this business, and that is that mortgage companies now, and some of the government-backed mortgages like Fannie Mae and I think FHA and some of the others have started recognizing solar as viable and allowing an increase in the appraised value of a home increase it by the cost of the solar system and roll the solar system into the initial mortgage of a new home or a purchase of a refinance of a home. And that is that's key in it. For example, if you're building a new home and you have an unshaded area, either rooftop or space in the backyard to ground mount or build a detached garage or a gazebo or something to mount solar on, the amount, or the predicted amount necessary to generate your kilowatt hours, and you put that in your mortgage, if you have a 15-year mortgage or longer, you'll be cash flow positive from the very first month, in that your monthly mortgage payment will increase less than your utility bill goes down. And this chart attempts to illustrate that. If this is, I didn't say that, but this is a 10 kilowatt residential system based on average CMO Southeast Missouri rates. if you take add it to your 15-year mortgage, your mortgage payment, this is the net after the increased mortgage payment. So the very first month, you'll actually save a few more dollars than your payment. And this is increasing because of inflation. This has a 3% per year inflation assumption. But even what's key and why I've been looking forward to the overall prices getting to this point, if you assume zero inflation, then you're still going to save just a tad of money during that whole 15 years. So and then once it gets paid for, you're going to save all that the system generates, and if it's sized properly, it'll be all your electricity. You'll have no electricity bill after that. One way to look at it is if you don't do that, you're going to spend actually a little bit more money each month than you would if you do it. And then once it gets paid for, you're going to have free electricity for a number of years. Even if you go with 30 years, it's even better if you have a 30-year loan, better early on. Total is a little bit better off, cumulative total of savings with a 15-year. But if you have a 30-year mortgage on a home and you incorporate it, you can see in the very first year you're going to save almost $600. And if you had zero inflation, you'd save $600 a year for 30 years. And your system's still going to be operating and should operate it, it could operate another 10 or 20 years easily, even after a 30-year mortgage. But you can see what you'd save with 3% inflation. And there's a lot of people in the industry predicting an average of 5% inflation in electricity rates, and especially the next few years when all of the coal plants are getting shut down and converted over. There's going to be some you've already had 2 or 3 pretty sizable increases in Missouri in the last couple of years. But I always look at it, I'm a fiscal conservative, so when I look at things, I try to look at the worst case from a financial standpoint. So in this case, the worst case from a return on